a voice from God. He's also a good golfer as well. Former voice of the Phillies, current Westwood One voice, NFL Films voice. Just a heck of a nice guy. And I saw this handsome fellow on the side of the Phillies press box the other night. Scott Graham is our guest here on the Pete Thompson Show. Good morning, Scott. How are you?
I'm okay. We need to correct a couple of things. First of all, not a good golfer. Apparently right now I'm in the middle of a severe downturn in my game. One of those times a year where you just decide to give yourself over to another power because you simply cannot hit the golf ball. And a lot of the other things that you said, some subjective stuff in there, but I appreciate it.
Well, tell me first and foremost, because we've most recently seen you do the Eagles preseason broadcasts, which outstanding job to you and your crew and all the people that are there. Plus, I got a real kick out of the fact, like game one, right out of the bat, Ross Tucker admits that he doesn't know how to change a tire.
How is that possible? Yeah, I mean, the guy was an NFL player. Also, if you just want to go over to the other side of the brain, the guy went to Princeton. How is it possible that he doesn't know how to change a tire? Again, I still haven't worked my mind entirely around that.
So tell me a little bit about, some of the crew, too, and I'm watching the credits, and I'm the guy, because of my background, that's like, oh, there's Dave Didinger, Ray Didinger's son. Isn't that great that he's on the crew? Oh, there's Artie Kempner. That's a name that I've heard Joe Buck say before. Like, you've got really A-listers for preseason football.
It's amazing because, this is something that the Eagles put together a number of years ago. And Artie Kempner is the guy who is the lead in this. He's been at Fox forever, 30 years, has done, Super Bowls, NFL, NASCAR. And they decided that what they wanted to do, the Eagles did, was create a broadcast that was, more on a network-type level. And they also wanted to see if they could figure out a way to make it so that it was not a revolving door. Because for, a number of years, it had been, okay, well, this crew's doing the preseason games this year. And you'll find that from time to time around the NFL. They wanted to make something that was, solidly in place for a number of seasons in a row. And they called me out of the clear blue sky one spring about 8 years ago, and they said, would you be interested in doing it? And I said, sure. And it's been it's one of the things that I enjoy most because it's back in a professional booth in Philadelphia, even for a very brief period of time, and I just get the biggest charge out of it.
Well, and we're certainly happy to have you there, a comfortable voice, a familiar voice, and you've had a couple partners, and your previous partner prior to Ross, have you stayed in touch with the now current Oakland Raiders GM?
Yeah, I have, although I've tried to see if I could stay away from what I thought was going to end up being quite an experience with this first camp and with Hard Knocks. But, I got to tell you, of all of the partners that I've worked with over the course of time, and there have been many, Mike Mack was one of my favorite. It was just a very easy give and take. We saw things the same way, and when we didn't, he explained to me why I was wrong. We could have gone on forever, except, he had to get all selfish and be a general manager somewhere. And, but it was a blast. And he did a lot of work with me over the course of the last couple of seasons as well on Westwood One. So we really got to know each other and became good friends.
I'm friendly with Kevin Kugler. So the Westwood One family and the names that you guys get to work with are pretty remarkable, quite frankly, and I always love when I see a picture of you and you're I'm in this booth. And by the way, I don't think people fully understand, Scott, the preparation that it goes into calling a game play-by-play and the size of the chart so that you can look right down and identify, do you draw all those up? Someone draws those for you? To detail a little bit the prep and the work that goes into calling an NFL game and doing play-by-play on television for an NFL game.
The spotter boards, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and everybody does theirs differently. Oftentimes, you'll find a number of broadcasters, especially at the higher levels, will send out to a service that will do theirs. I do my own because, I'll enlist some help, force my sons into helping me from time to time. But I prefer to have the information where I want it, how I'm looking for it, because in the middle of the game, if you're looking down for something, it's not like you have time to read a book. So it's got to be in a shorthand that you understand, in a location that you know to look for. And, there's a tremendous amount of work in doing those for preseason games because there's 90 guys on each side.
Right.
I mean, it's just, and I'm doing one right now for a game that I'm doing tomorrow night. I'm for Westwood One. I'm doing the Houston Oklahoma game on radio with Ross Tucker, and I'm putting my chart together for that. That could be 90 on each side, but you try to restrict it to 2 or 3 deep at positions, and you hope you don't get caught off guard.
Scott Graham's with us, our guest on the Pete Thompson Show on 97.3 ESPN. You mentioned your sons. That was one of the special moments I saw. Was it a Final Four? Was it just a regular NCAA game? I know there was a picture of you and your son both credentialed and at the same event, and you had posted about what a thrill that was for you.
There were a couple of different, and it's funny because they kind of crossed over. My oldest son went to Villanova, and he and his friends were crazy enough to drive down to Houston for the first Final Four, the first national championship. And, it was, hey, Dad, by the way, do you mind if I crash in your room? Sure, that's great. And so he was there for the national semis when they blew out Oklahoma. He was there for the Chris Jenkins shot, and it was his senior year. I mean, it could not have come together any better. Flash forward a couple of years later, and Michigan is playing Villanova. Well, one of my other sons went to Michigan, and in his time there, although none of my sons studied to be broadcasters or had any real interest in doing it, and I applaud them for that, he decided just for fun he was going to do some play-by-play work and some talk show work, and just did it, in his spare time just to enjoy it. And it just so happened that Westwood One put me on a Michigan game that he was doing, and we were sitting one table over from one another. So Dad was on the microphone, he was on the microphone, and my partner and my producer will tell you that I probably spent more time looking over my shoulder at him than I did watching the game that I was doing that night.
What a neat moment. Scott Graham's with us at Scott Wipeout, and of course that's the name of your production company, as Ross Tucker learned.
It's funny too because my dabbling in Twitter has not been effective or vast at all. In fact, I think I signed on to Twitter maybe 5 years ago. I think I might have tweeted at this point 120 times in 5 years. But I'm getting followers now, so I think I'm going to have to start doing something with this. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm doing these games with Ross, and he's so active in Twitter. But yeah, the fact that he had no idea that was my production company's name means that we don't know each other very well yet. But I guess we'll spend a little bit more time bonding in Norman, Oklahoma tomorrow night.
No better place to bond. I'll tell you this about Twitter, Scott Graham, because I think you and I are of a certain generation and a certain age that I was resistant to it as well, and yet Twitter is where news breaks. Now, don't be duped by the fake Wojnarskis or the fake Schefters out there or whoever, there's a lot of people that can create an account that looks like someone. Don't make that mistake. Don't retweet something until it has like the blue check next to it and you actually know, yes, Andrew Luck is retiring. There's one little Twitter lesson. And then the other thing is, it is a nice home for you to be able to put stuff up and present where you are, and like you said, you've got Ross Tucker and Spadero's on it. And to me, it's where news breaks. So like last Saturday when I was out at an establishment, I had kind of stayed away from my phone. Somebody came up to me and said, "What do you think about Andrew Luck?" I said, "Well, what's going on?" He says, "He's retiring." I said, "What?" I dug my phone out, and then as I'm digging my phone out, he says, "Well, is it true?" And, of course, the top 3 trending topics on Twitter were Andrew Luck, Indianapolis Colts, Irsay. I thought, yeah, that's probably true then if that's the case. So,
well, I will keep your warning in mind. Like I said, I think I'm going to get a little bit more active. At this point, Pete, I mean, I feel uncertain about liking something because I'm afraid that I'm going to do something wrong. I'm a little uncertain about replying to things. So retweeting is so far down the road for me. When it comes to that time, I'll give you a call. You can coach me through it.
Oh, that's so great. Yes. If I like it, is that, yeah, well, that's good. Dabble carefully and you'll be fine. And, view tweets. You can certainly do that. And, hey, I'm looking at a picture here from College World Series. You were in my old stomping ground in Omaha. Have you done that every year?
I've done that every year since they moved to the new ballpark,
stadium,
the
yeah.
TD Ameritrade. Yep, that was the first year that I was there, and I've been there every year since. And the best part about that, aside from getting to work with the mayor of Omaha, Kevin Kugler, is I get the opportunity for a few days to do baseball. I call it my baseball fix. I don't do any baseball. I used to do 162 games a year plus preseason.
Yes.
And, while I would not want to be in that life again at this point in my life, I still do love calling a baseball game. So for a few days in Omaha, 2 or 3, or sometimes in rare cases 4, I get an opportunity to call a baseball game, and it's a blast.
Scott Graham's with us, Westwood One, and I will say this, so your Omaha flipped with mine. Like, I've never been to a game at the new place, but I went to all the games when it was at the old place, and Zesto's was across the street and all that. I was in Omaha 98 to 03, and then they built the new place not long after I left, and it's still special. Those guys, that's where they're not playing for money. They're not playing for contracts. They're just playing for the heart and the pride and the soul. And certainly Omaha embraces the College World Series. Since you mentioned baseball, why don't we take our listeners through then, because people still associate you with the Phillies. I'm sure people will see you and ask you about the Phillies. You're interwoven in that fabric. So I had Chris Wheeler on as a guest a couple weeks ago, and it was real interesting to talk with him, Scott, because one thing he kind of took me through was that, I was a little bitter, for about a year and a half, when things like he didn't get to go out on his terms, and that he really sounded happy. He really sounded like he was in a place where he'd reached some acceptance and peace with it. And I know that I've had conversations with you, and you've said, hey, the work that I picked up when I left the Phillies, I know, you really have had an unbelievable life post-Phillies.
Yeah, and for quite a while, starting in 1991 when I started doing the post-game show, and that was the very first thing I did. I was working for the radio station at the time. I kind of thought that baseball was going to end up being my track for my career, and ultimately it led to more things. It led to play-by-play. It led to being the lead guy on radio, and even one season's worth of TV. I think I realized somewhere along the line that baseball was probably not going to be my track. And then you get into an odd spot because you're in a job that is the dream of so many vast numbers of people. And it's not a job that you would turn your back on. But there were aspects of the job that I simply, didn't agree with me, most of which had to do with the fact that I was traveling as much as I was. I was missing my kids growing up. And, you can never be Little League coach. You can never be there for this, band concert or whatever it was that you would love to be there for. You're on the road somewhere. And it bothered me. It bothered me the entirety. I would tell a lot of people that the happiest I was the 3 hours I was in the microphone for the game. And then, it would be pack a bag, get ready to go on another road trip. And I didn't like being away from my family. So that lifestyle, it's funny because now that lifestyle that my kids are grown and gone, it might not have been as bad a thing, although I do like my wife, and amazingly, after almost 29 years, she likes me too. But, that lifestyle for 162 games was not necessarily what I had hoped that it would be. And no, I didn't go out on my own terms with the Phillies. And yeah, that was it was bothersome based upon the way it came down and the semi-suddenness with the way it came down. But at the same time, as you point out, I could not have found a better path from that. And the amount of work that I do around the National Football League, do I miss baseball? Sort of. The game has kind of changed, and if you flip on the TV and watch a game now, the differences in the way the game is played, it's not as palatable to an old guy like me. I don't enjoy the style as much as I enjoyed the style back when I was a kid growing up and watching it. So anybody who's ever asked me the question, it sounds like a pat answer, but it's not. Phillies are pretty happy with who they've got in the booth, and I'm pretty happy where I am.
Scott Graham, our guest here on the Pete Thompson Show, Eagles play-by-play preseason TV and Westwood One studio host, and our guest here on the show for a little bit as we talk about his career and his life and where he's at now. And I guess a couple questions I had. Well, first and foremost, we have to talk about HK. We have to talk about Harry Kalas and the influence he had on you and the gift he gave you in his passing, too. I mean, the jobs that opened up work after he was gone. I mean, he continued to be important to you even after he left.
He became nothing short of a close and very good friend. And it was over a number of years that happened, probably back from even before I started working in the booth. And everybody knows this about Harry. You know, as a young broadcaster, a college guy or whatever, you'd go up to him, you'd talk to him, you'd ask him for advice, whatever it was. And he was always very gracious about that and generous with his time. And so I had known him before I ever started working with him. But then over the years, you know, a great friendship. And he was a mentor without being a mentor, if you can understand what I'm saying, because he did what he did by example. He would never, you know, grab me, take me aside and say, do this, with one notable exception. The one notable exception is not necessarily career growth. I was in Milwaukee, and when we prepared for our games, you prepared in the booth that you started in. They don't even flip booths anymore, but back then, Harry used to do some radio, so I would start in radio, Harry would start in TV, and you'd be doing your prep a couple hours before the game. Mm-hmm. I was sitting in the radio booth in Milwaukee, and Harry comes barreling into the radio booth. He'd been over in TV, and he said, "Scott Graham." You know, you turn around when you hear that.
Yes.
I said, "What's up, H?" He said, "Turn your attention to that TV monitor in front of you right now." I said, "Well, Harry, do it right now." I said, "What's going on?" "L.A. is going down the slide." And so I actually I got to the TV monitor and I watched what happened. Then I went back into TV and listened back to what happened. And he had done this stand-up, and he finished the stand-up, and he was going to go down the slide. And it was absolutely hysterical because he almost went over the edge,
right,
dropped the microphone, screamed so Harry and I were laughing literally for at least 15 minutes. And then Larry came back, and Harry gave him, you know, as much garbage as he possibly could about it. But I mean, Harry was a joy to be around. The thing that he taught me more than anything else, though, was when I started, I kind of laid back. And if we were around fans, or you know, it was like, you know, I'm the low man on the totem pole here, and you know, I'm just going to kind of lay back. And what he taught me was fans want to talk about the game.
Yeah.
So let's engage and talk about the game. And toward the end of my time with the Phillies, I mean, I could be spotted in many hotel lobbies with many Phillies fans on the road, figuring out whether or not they were going to make the wild card run and whether or not this correct right-hand pitcher was. I mean, I did a lot of that, and all of that comes back down to Harry, and that's who he was. He was a giving soul.
Very much so. I'll say this, Scott Graham. I'm with you. When the Phillies were in Boston and the starter was pulled in the third inning, and you know that word analytics, it's like a curse word to me because it's not the game that I grew up watching, but it is the game that we have now. And like you said, you get to scratch your itch at the College World Series. You've got college football. Now it's Oklahoma and who again is the next time we hear you?
I've got tomorrow night, Westwood One, Oklahoma and Houston for the season opener for the Sooners. And I've got another college game coming up in a couple of weeks at Houston when they take on Washington State. And, you know, the Westwood One stuff all starts next week. I've already started doing the voice stuff for films. And there's some things that are already out there, and that schedule is already laid out for the fall. And
that's a short commute to films, but where's Westwood One's home base? New York?
Westwood One's home base is in New York, and for a number of years, a lot of the stuff that I did was in the studio in New York. Now, there's some of that stuff that I can do from my production house, which is Wipeout Productions, and there's the ability to do some of that stuff from there, which is great.